programs normally seen at this time have been canceled or rescheduled so that we may present the following CBC News special.
Good afternoon from Toronto. I'm Peter Mansbridge. More of the CBC's continuing coverage of the tragic events at Cape Kennedy this morning. It is now almost 2 hours, 1 hour and 50 minutes ago, that the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Cape Kennedy, but its flight lasted only about 1 minute and 15 seconds before it exploded. Still no official word yet from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration as to the fate of the 7 people on board. But it is felt extremely unlikely that anyone could have survived the explosion. When we show you the pictures once again in a few moments, you'll understand that. But there has been no explanation at all from NASA since the moment of explosion as to what could possibly have gone wrong on this flight. And it is surprisingly taking a surprising length of time for any information to come out. President Reagan in the United States briefed reporters a few minutes ago, off camera, as to his knowledge of the situation at that hour. But at this particular point, President Reagan still has no definitive word on what happened to the Space Shuttle Challenger when it exploded, as I say, 1 minute and 15 seconds after takeoff. This, an awful day for President Reagan. It had started as a day really of celebration. And today in the United States, President Reagan was to give his State of the Union address tonight to the American people. He will still give that speech this evening, but now it is surrounded with a much different type of emotion than had originally been forecast. Now, as I said, it is almost 2 hours ago that the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Cape Kennedy. It was an awful sight, 1 minute and 15 seconds, though, into the flight. Here, once again, are those pictures. It is still very unclear at this moment what happened. As we said, there has been no official explanation, and even the experts who have viewed this tape over and over and over again are failing at this point to give a definitive word as to what could possibly have gone wrong. This just seconds after the launch of Challenger, and as you can see, the space shuttle itself there in the foreground. That big orange tank behind it is the main fuel tank. There are 2 solid white booster tanks attached to the main tank, as you can see at this point. They're just to help boost that shuttle aircraft off the ground. The big main fuel tank is all the fuel that's needed to get it up into orbit. At a certain point in the flight, all those pieces attached to the shuttle would be jettisoned. But at this point, in these first couple of minutes after takeoff, of course, they are a necessary part of the liftoff itself. But at this point, the Shuttle Challenger with 7 astronauts on board on what appeared to be a perfectly normal liftoff. No indication in what's called the telemetry, the talk between the shuttle astronauts until this particular moment. 1 minute, 15 seconds into the flight, an explosion. And you can hear in the background, even at this point, the NASA officials at Kennedy still talking as if it was a normal routine flight. However, quickly it became apparent the horror of what had happened. As I say, at this point, still no official explanation from NASA as to what had happened on that flight, and still no official explanation as to the state of health of the astronauts. But obviously, it doesn't take much to see from looking at those pictures that no one could have survived an incident like this. But there's still no official word from NASA. However, other word is starting to come out very quickly. As I mentioned earlier, President Reagan saying that he was shocked and horrified by what he'd seen on television, but still waiting for official word from NASA as to what had happened. Canada's Prime Minister Brian Mulroney has sent condolences to the American people through the Ambassador Thomas Niles in Ottawa. One of the first people that reporters in Washington started to question shortly after this accident was an American congressman by the name of Jake Garnes. The reason that he was questioned is fairly obvious. He was on one of the last shuttle flights, one of the first non-astronaut type people to go on board one of the shuttles, to try and get from him, he's a pilot as well, some idea. He listened to what's called the telemetry, the conversations between the shuttle astronauts and the ground crew. He listened to all that in that minute of 15 that it is available to try and find out whether he had any indication of what could possibly have gone wrong. He spoke to reporters in Washington a little while ago. Here are some of those comments that Congressman Jake Garnes made.
All right. To what happened today?
Well, it's very difficult for me to talk about it because these were my friends. Mike Smith, the pilot, was my mother hen the first month that I trained. They assigned him to me, go to my classes and help brief me. And I don't know of any time that I have been more shocked or more moved than when my first wife was killed in an automobile accident. And so it's been very, very difficult for me this morning.
What does this do to the space program here and its support on the Hill, Senator?
Well, I have great confidence in the space program. I think it's a remarkable system, and I think we should push ahead after we have determined the cause. Obviously, we should not fly until we have determined the cause of this particular failure. But I think we need to look at all of the successes, the remarkable safety record that the space program has had, the benefits that come from it, and the crew members that I knew so well. I would expect that they would want us to go ahead with the space program after we have gone through the proper investigations and analysis and know what happened.
Senator, our Congressman Jake Garnes, one of the astronauts on board one of the last shuttle flights just before Christmas, and his initial reaction to the horror that happened at Cape Kennedy earlier today when the shuttle Challenger exploded just after liftoff at Cape Kennedy. Now, as horrible as this is, it's the only information that people have to work on right now is looking at that tape over and over again. And what's been going on lately is trying to look at it in slow motion. And we can understand and appreciate how horrible this must be to watch, but there is a hint, perhaps a hint, of what might have gone wrong. Now, if we can just stop the picture there, if that's possible, right here. This is as close as you can get in terms of a close-up of the shuttle. It's the white pointed figure in the middle of that particular picture. The flame shooting out the back on to the left of that picture is the flame coming out of the major fuel tank. That is perfectly normal at that point. But there's starting to be hints of the flame spreading. As we continue the picture along, you can see hints of flame just running up in the area between the major fuel tank and the shuttle itself, both sides of that major fuel tank. The left-hand side of it, there it goes. You see the flame starting to creep and crawl over the top of the major fuel tank, and stop it there and ignite. Now that is either at the base of the shuttle, just underneath the shuttle, or alongside one of the solid fuel tanks, booster tanks, that's attached to the main fuel tank. Now just hold that picture there for a moment, because I think what you're going to find out as the day progresses, as there are more examinations of what could possibly have gone wrong here today at Cape Kennedy, this is going to be one of the major clues that people look at. Our science specialist, Eve Savory, is with me. Eve, as we look at this picture, both you and I have been down to Kennedy before and watched enough of these shuttle launches that we were starting to think it was no different than just watching a DC-9 take off at the airport, unfortunately. But let's watch this together. This is the first indication that something is going wrong. And as you can see, as the frames of each picture move along, that fire speeded up, crawled across in front of the shuttle, and the explosion starts to take place. And I can appreciate how awful this is, but let's if we can go backwards now. I want to just isolate where it started once again. All right, here we are, situation normal at this point, approximately 1 minute, 15 seconds after launch. They had just given the command, by the way, from the ground control to the shuttle astronauts, all throttles go, which is a normal command given at that time to ensure the full boost necessary to shoot this shuttle into orbit. Now, Eve, you're watching this with me now. Let's advance it slowly.
One of the things that they're wondering about is a possible leak. That main tank is full of hydrogen and oxygen, an extraordinarily volatile, explosive mixture, 2 million liters. And if there was such a thing as a leak, no one would stand a chance once it blew.
It's one of the arguments, or one of the discussions that's being made already today, is the talk of ejection seats on board the shuttle. As you know, there was talk of this initially in the shuttle program, that there should be ejection seats, but on the first few flights, the astronauts came back and said, look, if anything goes wrong, there's no time to use them.
Exactly. No one could possibly survive, and they're taking away room that we desperately need inside. And probably that would have been true. Probably had they had ejection seats, one can't see how one could have survived.
You've been in one of the mock-ups of the shuttle, and you make a very important point. They seem big to us when we look at them on television, but there's very little room inside. And it originally started with just 2 astronauts, with Crippen and Young on the first shuttle mission. And now there had 7 on this particular one, so the space is a premium on board the shuttle missions.
One should think of it as a cabin the size of a cockpit, doubled perhaps, and the rest of what we see as the shuttle is simply cargo.
All right, now this is an important series of pictures now that you're going to see. This is obviously after the explosion, the whole shuttle apparatus disintegrating. Now, if we go slowly through this, I think this is this. Okay, now hold it right there. Now, if you look at that cloud burst or explosion burst at the top right-hand corner of your screen, just a little lower from the top right-hand corner, you'll see a white, what appears to be a projectile, appearing through the cloud burst. There it is again. You see it? Hold it again. All right. That, from what we can tell at this point, is one of the solid fuel boosters that's attached to the main tank. Now, this is an indication, at least at this point, that it was not a problem with the booster rockets. It's still intact. Everything else at this point appears, that it is exploding. The main fuel tank and quite possibly the shuttle aircraft itself. Let's see how far these pictures continue on. Okay, hold it. Now, see, there is the booster tank exiting from the picture. That's it, circled there now. Intact, or at least apparently intact at this point. It's hard to tell with the flames coming at the bottom of it, which are normal, but whether that, in fact, that is the actual bottom of it or not. But that is going to give investigators today, you can be certain that the officials at NASA at Cape Kennedy and in Houston, Texas at the Johnson Space Center are going over and over and over this tape, trying to get a hint, a clue, anything as to what could possibly have gone wrong. But that may turn out two things that you've seen in those last couple of moments, two major hints. The way the flames were creeping across the main fuel tank and up underneath the shuttle itself, and that booster rocket exiting from the horrific explosion out on its own. It's extremely hard to tell where it's going. Those are the two, Eve, those booster rockets. They end up recovering those on a normal flight. They drop into the Atlantic Ocean. So one can assume that they're looking to see whether that rocket itself is recoverable in the Atlantic. All the pictures we've seen to this particular point have given no indication at all that anything is recoverable off the Atlantic. Obviously, from an explosion of that nature, the pieces, if any, that are recovered will be extremely small. But that solid booster rocket itself may end up being a major clue as to what could have gone wrong today.
There were two, of course, and we've only seen one exiting, so that doesn't really prove that the problem wasn't there. We also have seen pictures of the search area, and there seems to be simply nothing.
That's right. The NASA providing constant pictures here today of continuous replays of what happened to the shuttle, pictures of the recovery area where the experts have been looking for any kind of material possible. But at this point, they are giving no explanation in terms of solid background statements or news conferences as to what could possibly have gone wrong. So anything at this point is certainly speculation and conjecture. But those two things, it's clear from those slow motion shots that they're going to be looking very carefully at those two things. You mentioned, obviously, I can't remember now, it's it's been a year and a bit since we were down there, but the amount of fuel in that major fuel tank.
2 million liters.
2 million liters of the weight.
Of hydrogen and oxygen,
yeah.
Extraordinarily explosive mixture. Very, very frightening to see that.
And obviously, once some flame starts at any point, there is a horrific problem on the hands of all the investigators. Let me go through a couple of these things to recap what has been going on. It is now just a little over 2 hours since the Space Shuttle Challenger lifted off from Cape Kennedy. In fact, about 2 hours and 5 minutes ago that the liftoff took place. But the flight only lasted 1 minute and 15 seconds until the explosion that you just saw moments ago.